Hello everyone, and thank you for watching this video. My name is Chris Corey. I'm a planning consultant with McKenna, and we are excited and proud to be part of the Unified Development Ordinance process here with the City of Holland. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Industrial Zone District and things related to it. I do want to say before beginning this presentation that everything you're about to see is in draft form. We are eager for feedback, and I will mention numerous opportunities to give feedback at the end of this presentation as the process moves forward through the legal review and the upcoming public hearings. What is the Unified Development Ordinance? What it is taking the zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, streets and sidewalks ordinance, several other smaller ordinances, putting them all together in one document that governs the physical development of the City of Holland. By putting them all together, we put all those regulations in one place. They should be easier to use for businesses, for property owners, and of course for the city officials that use this every day. And so hopefully the regulations will be able to be applied evenly and fairly and efficiently. With regard to this presentation, we're first going to talk about an overview of the Industrial Zone District, and there is only one. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the Airport Zone District and the overlay that goes with that for the area surrounding the airport. Then we'll talk about some key topics for businesses with regard to individual sites and what is going to be required and allowed. And then we'll talk about opportunities to provide feedback on the UDO and follow it as it moves forward. The slide you're looking at now is the zoning map, the proposed zoning map for the City of Holland. We're not going to delve into that in too much detail right here, but it is available on hollandudo.com in an interactive format, which we'll talk about some of the details on that at the end of the presentation. But if there's a specific property you're interested in, the interactive map on the website is probably the tool to use to find that. These are the zone districts in the proposed UDO and also on the right-hand side in the existing zoning ordinance. As you can see, there have been changes. Everything nearly has a new name. We've reduced the number of districts overall, even though we are adding a couple of districts. And one of the things we did, or we're proposing to do, is consolidate the I-1 and I-2 districts. Right now, there are two industrial districts in the zoning ordinance. As you can see, the darker gray is the I-1. The lighter gray, which hopefully shows up well on the screen, is the I-2. The proposed UDO takes those two districts, puts them together into one I district, as you can see, which basically has the same boundaries, very similar to the combined I-1 and I-2 districts currently. Comparing those two districts, I-1 and I-2, to the new I district, you'll notice that we've split the I district into two parts when it comes to these dimensional standards like setbacks and building heights. The area north of 10th Street, which we've used as a dividing line because it divides some of the areas, the big industrial area in the south side of the city from some of the waterfront industrial on the north side of the city, is a little bit less restrictive in terms of setbacks just because of what's around it. Whereas the south of 10th Street area is fairly similar to the existing I-1 and I-2 districts. You can see only the rear yard setback there, which is 1 foot different, is bolded, showing it's different from those two districts. And the building height, which currently in I-1 is 40 feet, currently in I-2 is 100. The proposed building height in UDO is 60 feet with up to 100 feet approved by special land use approval. And we'll get into what a special land use approval is in just a second here. The next slide here shows the permitted uses in the industrial district, which are pretty broad. You can see it's a pretty long list. On the permitted uses side, a broad range of industrial uses like manufacturing, like wholesale, like warehousing, etc., as well as a number of uses you can see have an asterisk next to them. And those uses would be allowed in what we're calling non-industrial outlots. The idea behind a non-industrial outlot is they will allow a property owner to take advantage of what might currently be just a required setback and maybe increase the value of the property. On the special land use side, a special land use is a use that is permitted in the district but may not be appropriate on every lot within the district. So each time a special land use is proposed, it needs permission from the Planning Commission in order to begin operation. You may notice the difference here where it says low intensity manufacturing unpermitted, and under special land use it says high-intensity manufacturing. Now, there is a definition in the ordinance, in the draft UDO, that distinguishes between those two things, and ultimately the Planning Commission will be the arbiter of whether something falls into one category or the other if there's a dispute. But the idea there is to allow manufacturing uses that are not likely to be noisy or smoky or anything like that to operate as a permitted use, and to take the ones where there may be some off-site impacts and require the special land use process. I mentioned non-industrial outlots a minute ago. Getting into a little more detail here, you can see one of our industrial business sites here in the community, and you can see that it's surrounded by quite a bit of green space, grass, which is great. But what the UDO allows is for the business to take advantage of those opportunities by splitting out some of that setback land as outlots, which could then be used for commercial uses or supportive uses for the business, or could even potentially be used for residential. One big difference here, and Jenna Ellswick from the city will talk about landscaping in a little bit, but one big difference here between most zoning and these non-industrial outlots is in most cases, an industrial or commercial use is required to buffer itself from residential. The flip side here is that a residential use on one of these outlots would be required to buffer itself from the industrial, because this is an industrial district, right? So the developer of the residential would be responsible for that buffering. There are a couple of rules that are going to go into non-industrial outlots to kind of define what they can be in terms of their dimensions. You can see that there's both a minimum and a maximum size, 10,000 square foot up to 1 acre. That's to prevent the non-industrial outlots from growing too large to actually allow industrial on the site. The airport is getting its own zone district in the draft UDO. Right now, the airport is zoned agricultural, which is the district that's being eliminated. And so the airport we've created its own district just for the airport, which is really designed for the airport to be able to do what it needs on its own property in the interest of aviation safety and the economic development that flows from the airport, without a lot of rules that may not work in every situation for them. So it's a situation where the airport authority and the city would work together to make sure things work as they need to. Surrounding the airport, separate from the airport zone district, and also separate from the I district, is what we're calling the airport overlay. You can see it on the screen there in green. The airport overlay is based on the Aviation Safety Approach Plan, which is adopted by MDOT that every airport has. And within the different areas, which are designated by the various shapes you see there are different rules to promote both aviation safety and to protect land uses from the negative impacts of being next to an airport, like noise. So what the airport overlay does is within those areas, which are numbered 1 through 6, which generally flows from most restrictive to least restrictive, although there's some things that are okay in one area and not another, depending on the situation, regulates both uses and site features. So you see the chart of site features here, things like wetlands and ponds, smoke, vegetation, things that will attract wildlife. These things may be restricted in certain areas within the airport overlay in order to promote aviation safety. On this, you see the list of land uses that are regulated by the by the airport overlay. So depending again on which part of the overlay they're in, which means how likely it is an airplane is going to be flying low overhead, these different uses may be allowed. This works together with the underlying zone district. So if something's allowed in the underlying zone district, not allowed in the airport overlay, it's not allowed. If it's allowed in airport overlay, but it's not allowed in the underlying zone district, it's not allowed. It has to be allowed in both in order to be allowed. The West Michigan Airport Authority, the airport authority will have some say in things that go on within the airport overlay. They're going to be asked to review. They won't have approving authority, just that their comments will be received by the city with regard to things that are built. And they're going to take a look at the things on your screen there. The large gatherings of people, visual obstructions, noise, wildlife, obstructions to airspace, flammable hazardous materials, and they'll be able to provide comment on a site plan in case those things may be issues with a potential proposal. Now I'm going to turn things over to Jenna Ellswick, Senior Planner for the City of Holland, in order to talk through some of the site design features and other key topics that businesses may be interested in.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you to all of you for tuning in to this video on industrial uses or proposed changes with UDO on industrial zone districts and the airport overlay. Now into the key topics for businesses and developers. These are especially key for those that are doing some type of development, proposing development. The next slides will go into all of those different design standards that UDO would require, and actually that our existing zoning ordinance requires as well. So in Article 2 of UDO, there will be use tables that will actually list all of the permitted uses in each zone district, like those that Chris went through earlier in this video. Now, with those uses, a chart will also be made available that next to it, where it deems what the parking requirements are for each of those uses within the zone district. Also, what the bicycle standard would be, bicycle parking standards, and then also a reference to our use and standard definition section, Article 4. So a little bit more on parking standards. The UDO is proposing them to be very similar to what is existing, however, making them really based on square footage rather than on employees or even the square footage of a usable space. We're really just trying to simplify everything, and so this is based on square footage of an entire building, or by dwelling units for residential developments. So as an example, in the industrial zone district, you have warehousing, wholesale, warehousing which doesn't have a minimum, wholesale, no minimum. Again, these are parking requirements, manufacturing, no minimum, retail, one space per 200 square feet, and those would really be on those outlots that Chris mentioned. And then office and personal services, one space per 400 square feet. And again, that chart in Article 2 on the I district will delineate all of the minimum parking standards. Bike parking. So this would be required throughout the zone ordinance, not only in the F district, as is shown in this slide. Spaces would be required per auto parking or potentially per dwelling units, or maybe a mixture of both. The Planning Commission is working on those details, like if all-weather facilities may be required. Now, our design review standards are summarized in Article 5 of the UDO. Now, each of those design standards, the majority of those design standards, I should say, also have articles that are dedicated to them that go on to explain additional information. Some of them, however, don't have those. One such example is the Sound Transmission Classification Assessment Tool requirement. And so this would be under our environmental quality requirements. And it's a best practice that the Planning Commission has already incorporated into site plan review. And it's really specific, though, to residential development, residential multifamily development. And so I'm not going to go into much detail here, but if you are interested in learning more about this requirement, please do tune into our video on residential uses and on mixed uses. Now, landscaping will be set forth in Article 6 of the UDO, and the requirements are really are not changing very, very much. For instance, right-of-way trees are still required every 30 feet along a developer's along a development street frontages, the square footage of internal and perimeter parking lot landscaping is also proposed to stay the same at 1 square foot per 20 square feet of pavement. Proposed changes, however, is that the internal parking lot requirement for landscaping will be required for all lots with 20 parking spaces or more, rather than the existing standard, which makes it only required for lots larger than 200 feet. And this will be done via a parking lot island requirement, 1 per 20 spaces, and then trees would be required on those islands every 20 spaces as well. Building perimeter landscaping will be more specific to meet the intent, where it's required for buildings setback greater than 2 feet, and then along all walls visible from a street or publicly accessible parking lot. Also, maintenance of landscaping will be spelled out clearly as a requirement and an ongoing condition of approval. And as Chris mentioned, that buffer would be required when there's an outlot, and it would be on the residential development to put that buffer into play. And then there may be a tree replacement requirement, but Planning Commission is still working through that detail. In addition to traditional landscape requirements for site designs, as part of the desire for UDO to implement the city's adopted master plan as much as possible, a requirement would be added to provide a structural green infrastructure type into the site design. So Article 6 will provide background on what this means, provide a list similar to the one on your screen with images as to what structural green infrastructure types a developer can choose from. And then the details of exactly the size of these, the location, et cetera, those we're still working out with the Planning Commission. But we do know that this would all work in conjunction with the Stormwater Ordinance, which is Chapter 29 of the city's Code of Ordinances, which requires a separate stormwater permit in addition to site plan approval. Now, moving on to Article 7, this provides details on external site lighting. A photometric plan will be required from all applicants, showing that the foot candles on the site do not exceed 15 anywhere on the site, and that the foot candles don't exceed 0.5 on property lines that are adjacent to detached dwelling units with 1 to 4 units. Additionally, the maximum fixture temperature permitted would be set in UDO, unlike now, at 4,000 K. Site-wide foot candle limits would also could also be exceeded by the Planning Commission during a special land use approval. Now, a couple of additional site design items, and these are not required, but the city is definitely encouraging them by providing some specific details on them in Article 4 of the UDO. So these are accessory solar energy structures, as well as principal solar energy structures, which would only be permitted here in the industrial zone district. Accessory wind energy structures, and principal wind energy structures, which again would only be permitted in the industrial zone district. Now, on to subdivision standards. So, as Chris had mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, the UDO is proposing to have many different ordinances combined together. So currently we have a subdivision ordinance, that's Chapter 33 of the Code of Ordinances. But UDO is proposing to bring it into, to be in the same document as the zoning for easier development. And the subdivision ordinance really focuses on lot sizes and widths by the zone district. which is also provided in Article 2 of the UDO in those tables that were mentioned previously. Also street patterns and connections, parks and open space, and general neighborhood design, such as more on streets and sidewalks, which would also be incorporated into Article 10 and currently is a standalone ordinance. So the streets and sidewalk regulations that are being proposed through UDO proposes changes like that all private streets that provide access to more than 4 dwelling units or to industrial developments or commercial developments would need to be constructed to public street standards. And a sidewalk variance request would no longer go to city council for consideration. Instead, it would need a zoning variance from the Board of Appeals. New dead-end streets would be prohibited unless the Planning Commission determines that the topography or another feature deems it necessary. Stub streets onto other properties may be required as determined by the Planning Commission through site design. Intersection distances would be allowed and specified at 0 or 150 feet separation, street connections to existing streets. And then this article would also provide street designations and street design guidelines in terms of people and travel zones that make up a street's cross-section. Guidelines are also available in Article 10 of the UDO for the city when they're working on existing streets as well. So we know that there's a lot of information here, but we are very committed to making it as easy as possible, making UDO as easy as possible. Please do tune into our How to UDO video that goes through how to use this document in quite some detail. Please also do consult our UDO. The full draft is also available on this website, hollandudo.com. Please use it and go through, and there's many different feedback opportunities. We're very much interested in hearing back from you, what you think about all of this, and any questions that you may have. Feel free to drop those comments in at the hollandudo.com website or by emailing us at planningcomment@cityofholland.com. On our website, we also have an interactive mapping system where you can actually find your individual property by clicking on that magnifying glass on the top left of the map. And then it'll zoom you to your property, and you can determine what the name of the zone district is, be it the industrial zone district or some other zone district classification. And there, the permitted uses and special land uses that Chris showed you earlier will all be spelled out again there. And then you can leave a comment in those orange buttons, and it'll notify us that specifically there's a comment on the industrial zone district, for instance. We're holding both advisory public hearings as well as regulatory public hearings. The advisory public hearings go above and beyond what is required by the state. So likely in December, the Planning Commission will hold 2 of those advisory public hearings. Please do watch the city's website, hollandudo.com, the Sentinel, for dates, times, venues, and then also the COVID protocols that will be in place for those events. We'll also be providing that on our social media as well. And then in likely February, the Planning Commission will hold its regulatory public hearing, which would be the recommendation of approval, we hope, to City Council. And then City Council will take up their regulatory public hearings in March or April 2021. Again, please do check out our additional videos available on this website, hollandudo.com. Again, as I mentioned before, how to Udo, changes that are being proposed in the residential zone districts, changes in commercial zone districts, and changes in form-based code that will be provided in full with everything form-based code. Thank you again for watching. Please do contact us. We understand that this is a lot of information, and we really do want to begin discussions or continue discussions. Planning, comment at cityofholland.com. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.